Story: the river of constant becoming and the illusion of the fixed self. The sun hung low over the vast expanse of the Ganges, casting long, amber shadows across the dusty banks where a lone seeker sat in profound contemplation. He observed the water as it rushed past, a relentless procession of liquid moments that refused to be captured by the eye or the intellect. His mind, conditioned by years of seeking stability in a world of shifting sands, struggled to reconcile the concept of a river with the reality of its constant departure. He realized that the river he had stepped into moments ago was no longer present, replaced by a completely new volume of water that carried with it the debris of distant mountains and the secrets of hidden valleys. This realization created a tremor in his consciousness, a subtle shifting of the internal foundations that supported his sense of identity. The Buddha stood at a distance, leaning against an ancient banyan tree, his gaze fixed not on the water but on the seeker whose internal world was beginning to unravel. The movement of the mind was like a weaver at a loom, perpetually trying to thread the needle of the present with the frayed strands of the past. The seeker noticed how his thoughts attempted to label the ripples, to categorize the foam, and to find a stable point of reference in the chaotic flux of the current. Yet, every time a thought crystallized, the object of its focus had already vanished downstream. It was an exercise in futility that mirrored the entirety of human existence. He began to perceive the neurosis of the ego, which functions as a dam attempting to halt a flood with nothing but wooden stakes and woven grass. The more he tried to define himself, the more he felt the slippery nature of his own soul. Was he the man who arrived at the bank an hour ago, or was he the man now breathing the damp evening air? The cells of his body were participating in a silent exchange with the environment, exhaling what was once internal and inhaling the external world. The boundary between the observer and the observed began to blur like ink on wet parchment. He saw that the fear of death was merely the fear of the river moving faster than the mind could follow. If he could match the speed of the current with the speed of his awareness, there would be no more friction. The resistance of the ego was the only source of heat in this cold reality. He watched a single leaf fall from a branch and merge with the foam, noticing how his mind assigned a narrative of loss to the event. Why did the mind crave the static over the dynamic? Why was change perceived as a threat rather than the fundamental nature of being? The seeker shifted his posture, and with that movement, 1,000 tiny sensations within him died while 1,000 others were born. He was a graveyard and a nursery all at once. The sound of the river became the sound of his own pulse, a rhythmic reminder of the ticking clock of materiality. The Buddha smiled without moving a muscle, acknowledging the seeker's transition from a watcher of the water to the water itself. The distinction between the inner and outer worlds collapsed like a wall of sand under a rising tide. He was finally awake to the beautiful terror of never being the same person twice. Every concept he had ever held about himself was like the sediment at the bottom of the river, heavy and stagnant, yet always being pushed toward the great ocean of the unknown. He breathed in the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, finding a strange comfort in the smell of endings. To die to the moment was to be born to the next. And in that rhythm, he found the only peace that was not a fabrication. The stillness of the forest was not a lack of motion, but a perfect synchronization with it. The seeker closed his eyes and felt the vastness of the cosmos within the small container of his ribcage. He was the ancient water, the mountain silt, and the silent witness. The mind finally ceased its frantic archiving, allowing the present to flow through it without leaving a single mark or a single scar. In this emptiness, he found a fullness that no mountain could possess. The river continued its journey to the sea, carrying away the last remnants of his constructed self into the dark and welcoming night. Story: the architect of sand and the wisdom of crumbling stone. Deep within the emerald silence of a bamboo grove near the kingdom of Magadha, an elderly craftsman sat before a stone stupa he had spent 40 years refining. The surfaces were once smooth as polished jade, etched with the intricate stories of the enlightened ones. But now the relentless hand of the seasons had begun its slow work of reclamation. Moss crept into the delicate carvings of lotus petals, and the hairline fractures of heat and cold had begun to map a new and unplanned geography across the face of the monument. The craftsman felt a deep ache in his chest, not for the loss of the stone, but for the loss of the mental image he had held of its perfection. He watched as a single drop of rain fell onto a weathered ridge, carrying away a microscopic grain of granite. In that infinitesimal event, he perceived the grand dissolution of the universe, the silent and invisible engine that drove the stars and the seasons alike. His mind began to trace the origins of his attachment, dissecting the layers of pride and the desire for legacy that had blinded him to the beauty of the crumbling edge. The Buddha walked slowly through the grove, his footsteps making no sound on the carpet of fallen leaves. He did not offer words of comfort, for comfort was a temporary balm that only delayed the inevitable confrontation with reality. Instead, his presence served as a mirror to the craftsman's inner turmoil. The old man noticed how his mind reflexively tried to repair the stone in his imagination, smoothing over the cracks and scrubbing away the lichen. This mental habit of restoration was the very source of his suffering. He was fighting a war against the passage of time with a weapon made of memories. As he watched the Buddha, he saw a being who was not a monument, but a movement. The Buddha was like the wind that passed through the bamboo, touching everything yet clinging to nothing. The craftsman's perspective began to shift from the finished product to the process of decay itself. He saw that the moss was not an enemy of the stone, but its successor. The cracking of the granite was not a failure of craftsmanship, but the stone's way of breathing after centuries of being held in a rigid form. He realized that his own body was a stupa of flesh and bone, currently undergoing the same graceful return to the elements. The stiffness in his joints and the dimming of his eyes were not tragedies, but the natural softening of his structure. The mind's insistence on permanence was a hallucination born of fear. He began to observe the mechanics of his own grief, seeing it as a series of cognitive echoes bouncing off the walls of his ego. When he let go of the need for the stupa to remain unchanged, the stupa became more beautiful than it had ever been in its youth. The cracks became pathways for light, and the moss became a vibrant cloak of living green. The perfection was not in the preservation, but in the yielding. He saw that the entire world was a sand mandala being blown away by a gentle breeze. The kingdoms of men, the mountains of the north, and the very thoughts in his head were all participating in this magnificent exit. The Buddha stopped and looked at a fallen bamboo stalk that was rotting into the dark soil. In that decay, new shoots were already finding their strength. The craftsman understood that there was no such thing as an end, only a transformation of energy and form. His desire to leave a legacy was a desire to stop the world from turning. He laughed softly, a sound that blended with the rustle of the leaves. The tension in his shoulders dissolved. He no longer needed the stone to tell his story. He was the story, and the story was currently being rewritten by the wind and the rain. He looked at his withered hands and saw them as part of the earth. no different from the roots of the trees or the silt in the stream. The mind reached a state of equilibrium where the past and the future were recognized as ghosts, and only the crumbling present remained. In that crumbling, there was a profound freedom. He was no longer the architect of stone, but the observer of light. The stupa stood as a testament not to his skill, but to the glory of its own inevitable return to the dust. The craftsman closed his eyes and felt the weight of 40 years lift from his spirit, leaving only the lightness of a leaf dancing in the void. Story: the sound of the vanishing bell and the silence of the mind. The sky above the Jetavana monastery grew dark with the impending weight of the monsoon rains, a heavy indigo curtain that seemed to press against the very edges of human consciousness. A young monk stood under the eaves of a wooden pavilion, his attention caught by the rhythmic tolling of a bronze bell from a distant temple hidden in the folds of the hills. Each strike of the bell was a sharp puncturing of the heavy air, a clear and crystalline note that vibrated through the marrow of his bones before slowly dissolving into the humid silence. He noticed how his mind reached out to grasp the sound, attempting to sustain the vibration long after the physical wave had passed. This mental clinging was a fascinating phenomenon, a desperate attempt by the ego to preserve a ghost of an experience. The bell was gone, yet the memory of the bell continued to occupy the space of his awareness, creating a secondary and artificial reality. The Buddha sat nearby on a simple straw mat, his eyes closed in a state of profound stillness that seemed to absorb every sound without being disturbed by any of them. The monk observed the mechanics of his own hearing, realizing that the ear did not seek the sound but merely allowed it to occur. It was the mind that was the hunter, stalking the resonance like a predator in the high grass. He began to analyze the life cycle of a single note, from its explosive birth at the moment of impact to its long and haunting resonance and its final disappearance into the void. Where did the sound go when it was no longer heard? Did it continue to exist in some subtle realm, or was its nature defined entirely by its cessation? He saw that the mind was terrified of the gaps between the sounds. It filled those intervals with expectations, waiting for the next strike with a tension that was both subtle and exhausting. The silence was not an empty space, but a living presence that the ego could not colonize. As the rain began to fall in heavy and rhythmic sheets, the sound of the bell was swallowed by the roar of the water hitting the earth. The monk felt a pang of loss, a mourning for the lost clarity of the bronze note. This grief was the same grief one feels for a lost youth or a departed friend, a refusal to accept the fundamental law of entropy. The Buddha opened his eyes and looked at the rain, his expression reflecting a total absence of preference. To him, the roar of the rain and the silence of the bell were of the same substance. The monk realized that his search for meaning in the sound was a distraction from the reality of the silence. The mind was a builder of bridges over rivers that did not exist. He tried to settle into the present moment without the crutch of a recurring rhythm. He watched as his thoughts tried to mimic the sound of the rain, creating a narrative about the weather and its impact on the crops. This internal chatter was just another form of noise, an attempt to drown out the vast and terrifying quiet of the cosmos. He began to let the thoughts fall like the raindrops, not trying to catch them or organize them into a pattern. The center of his being began to expand until the monastery, the rain, and the distant bell were all contained within a single field of perception. There was no longer a monk listening to the rain. There was only the rain and the listening. The boundary of the skin was an illusion sustained by the constant friction of desire. In the absence of desire, the self was as porous as the air. He understood that every moment was a strike of a bell that was never the same bell. The vibration was the only reality, and the vibration was always ending. To live was to be the sound in the very instant of its fading. The bell struck one last time, a faint and lonely echo that reached him through the deluge. He did not reach for it. He let it pass through him like light through glass, leaving him empty and whole in the heart of the storm. Story: The Potter of Vaishali and the Anatomy of the Broken Vessel. On the outskirts of a dusty village near the river Rohini, a traveler paused to watch an old potter shaping a mass of wet clay on a spinning wooden wheel. The potter's hands were covered in a fine gray silt, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to coax the form out of the formless. The traveler observed the precise moment when a lump of earth became a vessel, a container for water or grain or oil. He marveled at the strength of the walls and the elegant curve of the neck. However, as the potter lifted the finished jar to set it in the sun, his foot slipped on the damp ground, and the vessel shattered into a dozen jagged pieces. The traveler felt a sudden and sharp contraction in his stomach, a reflexive rejection of the destruction he had just witnessed. His mind had already assigned a value to the jar, a utility and a future that were now obliterated. The potter did not cry out or even sigh. He simply reached for another lump of clay and began the process again. The Buddha happened to be passing by on his way to the village grove, walking with a measured pace that suggested he was moving through eternity rather than across a dirt road. He paused and looked at the shards of the broken jar, and then at the new life beginning to take shape on the wheel. The traveler felt a deep confusion as he watched the scene. How could the potter remain so indifferent to the loss of his labor? The traveler's mind was a whirlwind of judgments and attachments, obsessing over the wasted time and the ruined beauty. He realized that his suffering was not caused by the broken clay, but by the mental structure he had built around the clay. He had created a concept of a whole jar, and when the reality did not match his concept, he experienced pain. The potter was in a state of alignment with the fragility of the material world. He knew that the jar was broken from the moment it was conceived. Its eventual destruction was written into its very composition. The traveler began to see that his own life was like that jar, a temporary assembly of elements held together by the spinning wheel of karma. He felt the vulnerability of his own existence, the delicate balance of breath and heartbeat that could be disrupted at any moment by a single misstep. This realization did not lead to despair, but to a strange and expansive clarity. If everything was already broken, there was nothing to fear. The anxiety of preservation was replaced by the joy of participation. He watched the potter's thumbs press into the heart of the new clay, creating a hollow space where there was once a solid mass. This hollow space was the true purpose of the jar, yet it was the only part that was not made of clay. The mind, too, had to become a hollow vessel to be of any use. It had to be empty of preconceptions and rigid identities to hold the vastness of the truth. The Buddha looked at the traveler, his gaze a silent transmission of the Dharma. He saw that the man was beginning to understand that the pieces on the ground were just as much a part of the universe as the jar on the wheel. There was no hierarchy of form. The dust of the road, the water of the river, and the skin of the potter were all shifting and trading places in a cosmic dance. The traveler felt the tight knot of his ego begin to loosen. He saw that his desire for things to remain whole was a desire for the world to be a museum instead of a garden. In a garden, the falling of the blossom is just as essential as the opening of the bud. The potter finished the second jar and set it down with the same care he had used for the first. He was not attached to its success or its failure. He was simply the movement of the clay. The traveler continued his journey, but his steps felt lighter on the dusty road. He looked at the horizon and saw the clouds shifting and dissolving in the heat of the afternoon. And he smiled at the beauty of a world that refused to stay still. The broken shards behind him sparkled in the sun like jewels, no longer a symbol of failure, but a celebration of the inevitable. He was no longer a collector of stable things, but a witness to the glorious and unceasing flow of existence. Story: the lamp of the third watch and the mirage of continuity. Under the vast and silent canopy of the Gosinga forest, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the nocturnal chorus of insects, a solitary seeker sat before a small clay lamp during the third watch of the night. The flame was a tiny, amber tongue of fire that danced upon a pool of sesame oil, casting flickering shadows that played against the gnarled roots of an ancient sal tree. The seeker observed the flame with an intensity that transcended mere looking, turning his gaze into a surgical instrument of the intellect. He noticed how the flame appeared to be a single, stable entity, a persistent light that maintained its form and identity through the hours. Yet, as he delved deeper into the mechanics of the light, he began to perceive the deception of the senses. The flame was not a thing but a process, a rapid and violent transformation of oil into heat and light. Every fraction of a second, a new portion of the wick was consumed, and a new measure of oil was drawn upward to be sacrificed to the heat. The flame he saw at the beginning of his meditation was not the flame he saw now. It was a series of discrete events so closely linked in time that the mind perceived them as a seamless continuity. This realization sent a ripple of cognitive dissonance through his awareness. He began to apply this empirical observation to the nature of his own consciousness. Was his sense of self anything more than the persistence of a flicker? He observed his thoughts as they arose from the dark reservoir of the unconscious, burned brightly for a moment in the light of his attention, and then vanished into the shadows. The Buddha sat in the darkness just beyond the reach of the lamp, a presence that was felt rather than seen, embodying the very stillness that the flame was consuming. The monk realized that the mind was like the wick, providing the medium for the combustion of experience. Without the oil of desire and the wick of the body, where would the flame of the ego reside? He saw the absurdity of his efforts to protect a self that was being replaced 1,000 times every minute. The fear of extinction was revealed as a misunderstanding of the present moment. Extinction was not a future event to be dreaded, but a current reality that allowed for the appearance of life. The flame had to die to the oil to become the light. He felt the tension of his identity beginning to soften, the rigid boundaries of his personhood dissolving into the flow of the elemental exchange. He was the oil, the wick, the heat, and the darkness that contained them all. The movement of his mind slowed as he stopped trying to bridge the gaps between the flickers. He allowed himself to fall into the intervals of darkness that the eye normally ignores. In those microscopic pauses between the bursts of light, he found a peace that was not dependent on the fire. The morning star began to rise over the horizon, a distant and cold light that did not require the sacrifice of oil. The seeker looked at the lamp and saw it as it truly was, a beautiful and temporary manifestation of causes and conditions. He blew gently on the flame, and as the light vanished into a thin wisp of smoke, he felt no sense of loss. The smoke drifted upward and merged with the mist of the forest, and the seeker remained in the pre-dawn grayness, no longer a flame trying to burn forever, but the very space in which the burning occurred. His mind was empty of the past and the future, resting in the profound neutrality of the void. He understood that the end of the flame was not the end of the light. but the beginning of a different kind of seeing. The forest breathed with him, an infinite and shifting tapestry of being that required no permanent center to be whole. Story: the summit of the sun and the transience of the royal shadow. High upon the rugged peaks of the Vulture Peak Mountain, where the wind whispered ancient secrets through the crevices of the stone, a powerful king stood overlooking the vast territories he had conquered through years of strategic brilliance and iron will. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of crimson and violet. As the king looked down at the valley floor far below, he noticed his own shadow stretching out across the rocks, growing longer and more imposing with every passing minute. The shadow seemed to cover entire villages and forests, a dark and silent giant that mirrored his own sense of historical importance. He felt a surge of pride in the reach of his influence, believing that the mark he had made on the world would endure as long as the mountain itself. The Buddha was seated on a flat outcropping of rock nearby, his face turned toward the fading light with an expression of absolute equanimity. The king approached the silent teacher, his mind filled with the weight of his responsibilities and the grandeur of his legacy. However, as the sun dipped below the final ridge, the king watched with a sudden and chilling clarity as his shadow vanished in an instant. The dark giant that had dominated the landscape was gone, swallowed by the rising tide of the evening. In that moment of disappearance, the king felt a profound void within his own heart. He realized that the shadow had no independent substance, existing only as a temporary interruption of the light. If the shadow was an illusion, what was the nature of the body that cast it? He looked at his hands and his royal robes, seeing them now as part of a larger and more complex shadow being cast by the light of consciousness upon the world of matter. The mechanics of his mind began to shift from the pursuit of permanence to the observation of the ephemeral. He saw that his kingdom was merely a larger shadow, a collective projection of thousands of minds that would all eventually fade into the night of history. The mountains themselves were being slowly ground down by the wind and the rain, their granite strength a mere slow-motion ripple in the eyes of the universe. The Buddha remained still, his presence a reminder that there was a level of awareness that did not depend on the presence or absence of shadows. The king's internal narrative of conquest and glory began to unravel like a frayed tapestry. He perceived the exhaustion of the ego, which spends its entire existence trying to solidify the smoke of its own perceptions. He felt the cold air of the mountain against his skin and realized that the sensation was a fleeting guest, arriving and departing without leaving a trace. The mind's habit of claiming ownership over experience was the root of all his anxieties. If he owned nothing, not even his own shadow, then nothing could be taken from him. The stars began to emerge in the darkening vault of the sky, distant and indifferent points of light that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless kings. He stood in the silence of the summit, feeling the immense weight of the mountain beneath his feet and the infinite expansion of the space above him. He was no longer a ruler of lands, but a traveler in time, a brief intersection of light and matter that was already beginning to disperse. The fear of being forgotten was replaced by the relief of being part of the whole. He turned to look at the Buddha one last time. And in the dim light, he saw that the teacher had no need for a shadow to prove his existence. The king walked down the mountain path as the moon rose, his heart quiet and his mind as clear as the mountain air. He understood that to hold on was to suffer, and to let go was to find the only kingdom that could never be lost. The path was steep and the night was long, but he moved with the grace of a man who had finally discovered that the end of his shadow was the beginning of his freedom.